Every week on my Instagram, I run a Q&A with my followers. They ask me their questions about how gender equality and oppression is affecting them in their world, and I answer. If you join me on Instagram every week, you can take part in the Q&A, ask your own questions, get your answers, get involved. What can I say to men who say that men built the world we live in and that makes them superior/entitled?
Most men don't tend to know this because they won't pick up a history book unless it's about wars or themselves. But women have always worked. Women have always done the work that has built society. In fact, I would go so far as to say it is women, not men, who have built society. And I'm not even just talking about building babies in our bodies. I'm talking about domestic work, care work, and yes, paid work and manual labor. Women have always helped to build society. Like, women haven't just been doing reproductive and domestic and caring labor throughout history. We have been doing actual work. And if we didn't go out and build the roads and the hospitals and the buildings, it's literally just because men prevented us from going into those fields. It can be really easy to think of the past as a time when women just swanned around the home like in a Regency novel, and men went out and brokered contracts and laid steam train tracks. But what we forget is that we were not Elizabeth Bennet in a Jane Austen novel. I would have been the woman who washed Elizabeth Bennet's underwear for period stains. I would have been the Bennet family cook, Mrs. Hill. Most women throughout history were not the aristocracy, were not the ones languishing around at home with nannies to take care of their children and nothing but embroidery to do, even though embroidery is a very valid art form. At every point in history when women were allowed to go out and do some sort of paid or compensated work, women did that work. The problem is doing that work tends to net them independence, and men don't like that. But even when they weren't doing paid work, women would be doing the domestic and care work that literally builds civilizations. When men claim that they built the world and that women would be nothing without them, what they really just mean is that men constructed a physical reality. They came up with roads and buildings and hospitals. But what they are failing to acknowledge is that they held the strings to those industries, and they deliberately prevented women from entering education and industries like STEM, which even today hold really high barriers for women and are hostile to women. When men say women weren't involved in building the physical world, it's like, so you agree men have gatekept women from the STEM industries throughout history. They also like to point out that men are the only ones who went to war, but it's like, again, you didn't invite women to go to war, and you guys are the ones who decided to have the wars to begin with. Men tend to hate when you point this out, especially because it highlights the gender pay gap. But the cost, like the actual value of women's domestic and caring unpaid labour in Australia alone, is worth more than $400 billion. And this has been the case throughout history. Women have always been required to supply the type of labour that props up households and makes it possible for men to go out and achieve the things that men want to achieve. And even if you don't count the domestic sphere, which you should because it is labour, women have been involved in many of the other paid professions and skills that have built society. Women have been amazing textile makers, weavers. They have been the makers of ceramics. Women pioneered the beer making industry and invented science fiction, both domains which men think they own.
Thoughts on Matt Rife? Are all bets off when it comes to jokes?
What just happened with Matt Rife is an amazing example of how the patriarchy works in its default mode, and also a really strong reminder to women that even when men seem like they might be for the girlies, there's a good chance that they won't be. And the reason that they won't be is because patriarchy teaches men by default to align with other men, to prioritize other men, to seek the approval of other men, and to hugely fear the disapproval of other men. Men's default position is misogyny. Unless they spend time actually thinking and unpacking gender equality and try to see women as people rather than objects, their default position will be to do what Matt Rife did. So, with Matt Rife making a domestic violence joke, all he has shown us is that he thinks it is more important to appeal to the kinds of men who would find a domestic violence joke at the expense of women funny than it is to be faithful and respectful of his majority female audience and soon to be almost zero female audience. I don't think the question of what we can and can't joke about is as interesting right now as the question of what men will show themselves to be once they are given even a little bit of power. So if you don't know much about Matt Rife, he was a very little known comedian who actually started getting a lot of traction on TikTok in the last year with clips of his crowd work because he's amazing at the improv crowd work type stuff. He's also very, very handsome. So he has attracted a majority female audience who have been faithful to him. He managed to leverage it into a Netflix special, which opens with a domestic violence joke and goes on to make a lot of other distasteful jokes. So when it comes to what you can and can't joke about, this has been litigated so many times, but I think it comes down to punching up and punching down. If you make a joke at the expense of someone with more power than you, then fine, you can't do any real harm. But if you punch down and make a joke about someone or a system that has less power than you, all you are is a bully and you are just contributing to harm. And we can hope that Matt Rife gets permanently cancelled, but he's a white man, so he won't.
Why do all guys think watching porn alone in a monogamous hetero relationship is justifiable?
Because it is justifiable. And please stay with me. Don't tap out if that made you feel uncomfortable. I really want to go into why I say that it is justifiable. I'm going to leave aside the issue of porn for a second here and say that it is imperative that we understand that all humans, regardless of relationship status, have a right to maintain what Dan Savage calls a zone of erotic autonomy. That essentially means we are all entitled to our private fantasies, our private sexual dreams and wants and desires, and we are entitled to masturbate alone. So I will address the added complications of the fact that it's porn, but just sticking to like plain old masturbation, I just need us to really all get through our heads that we are not entitled to dictate how our partner self-pleases and whether they self-please, and that attempting to control that is actually a type of abusive behavior. I'm not suggesting that you are being abusive. And I know that sometimes when we have a problem with our partner masturbating, it's often because they're not giving us the energy that we need sexually. And we can see that as a little bit of a betrayal because they're giving that energy to themselves. They clearly have some sort of a sex drive. They have some sort of a fantasy that they want to engage with. And yet when it comes to what we might need from them, they seem to have an empty well, right? And I do understand that. That hurts a lot, but that has to be sort of a complicated conversation with your partner about why that's happening. I'm not personally against the concept of porn. I watch porn myself, but I also know that we can't divorce mainstream porn from what it does to the way that men see women and also just the really degrading and disrespectful practices that it depicts. So we can feel potentially extra betrayed or afraid when our male partners are watching a lot of porn because potentially they are going to either not be able to see us the same way, start to expect what they're seeing in porn to be happening in their bedroom, and more seriously, they could potentially be trying to coerce or force us into doing some of the more degrading, violent, disrespectful things they see in porn. And if that's not done in kind of a mutually safe, sane and consensual kink kind of way, then it is super problematic. And so if it is just about him wanking alone, I'm sorry, but he's entitled to his zone of erotic autonomy. But if it is about the behaviors that porn is making him engage in, then you definitely need to sit down and have a conversation with him about what he is watching and why.
How to deal with people who say you are too much into feminism.
Here's what you say to people who tell you that you're too much into feminism. You just take a leaf out of Alex Batulis Fernandez's book here and point out that you exist on a spectrum from raging feminist to complicit in your own dehumanization, and you know which end of the spectrum you would prefer to be on.
That's it for this Q&A. Thank you so much for listening. Do you love exclusive content that's just for you and to sticky beak inside other people's lives? If so, please consider subscribing to my Instagram. Your subscription to my Instagram is less than $5 a month, and that gets you guaranteed answers in the weekly Q&A, which is absolutely not the case for non-subscribers. It also gets you subscriber-only content and a peek inside my life, how I live, laugh, lol in a feminist way. But personally, my favorite thing is the guaranteed answers in the Q&As. I love being able to tell my subscribers that any question they ask me every week will absolutely get answered. So go to my Instagram and hit the subscribe button. Find me on Instagram at summertothill, that's summer with an O, spelt the same way as you see in this YouTube channel. I can't wait to see you there.